So we finally had good news this week, but don't fool yourselves. It's just beginning. If you look online, they are trying to say that even this election was rigged. Then they're talking about all the ballots they found. There is an organized attempt to destroy this election, the next election, the 28 election. We still have to put together a coalition of a huge majority of Americans, 70% of Americans, who say, we hate this administration. We hate what they're doing. We hate their authoritarianism. We hate that they're destroying core American values. And that's where we got to go, and let's get started. Hey, Nick, how are you?
Hey, Marshall. I'm great. I'm excited about this conversation.
Yes, me too. Me too. Gregg Hurwitz is with us today. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah, so we've got Gregg Hurwitz joining us. He's a New York Times #1 internationally best-selling author of 26 thrillers, including the Orphan X series. His novels have won numerous literary awards. He also writes screenplays and television scripts, is an award-winning documentary producer, and he writes comic books. But that's not necessarily the list of reasons why he's on this particular show, is it?
No, he's not. I've known Gregg since 2017 when we worked together to try to undo the damage that Trump was doing, and he is one of the smartest political minds I know. He's done incredible work for the Democrats. He's done incredible work with the dangerous ones in the past, making political ads and helping Democrats get elected. But Gregg is different from most Democrats you'll meet because he believes so strongly in the core American value that we are a democracy that's liberal, which means that we have to talk to one another, that we get things done by persuasion, not by intimidation, by debate, not by violence. And his willingness to walk that walk, to talk to people on the other side and find out what they have to say, and also his willingness to look at the Democrats and look at what we've done wrong has been extraordinary. And if he had been listened to 5, 6, and 7 years ago, we might not be in the dilemma we're in today. So I really want folks to think about that, because I know that right now we're all enraged and we all just want nothing but to bring down this administration and bring America back. But in order to do that, we have to be the grown-ups. We have to stand up. And this is a person who is standing up in a very grown-up way. And so I want to welcome him to the show. Gregg Hurwitz, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, gentlemen.
Hey, Gregg.
So glad we're finally doing this. You know, full disclosure, Gregg and I have known each other for, what is it, pal, 9 years now? 8 years? Something like that. We were in the wars together, trying to help the Democrats after Trump became president. And, you know, I immediately saw sort of how smart Gregg was when a group of writers, including us, went to Washington to try to help. And the two of us kind of bonded on really how clueless the Democrats were then compared to now, which is more clueless. So at any rate, you know, one of the things I learned from Gregg, which I should have learned before, but I went to Brandeis and not Harvard like him. So there were gaps in my education, but Gregg likes to talk about the big 5 personality traits and how predictive they are of people's political leanings. And I thought this would be a good place to start, because I think the way you talk about it also points to other ways in which you see the political world and the psychological world. So why don't you explain to us the big 5 traits, and I'll tell you why you're wrong.
All right. That sounds like how most of our conversations go.
Exactly.
So I'm happy we're starting on familiar terrain.
Yeah.
So a lot of you listeners are familiar with the Myers-Briggs tests that you took in high school that sort of mapped out your different skills and your different talents. Big 5 personality theory is a longstanding field, and the Myers-Briggs is sort of the cliff notes to that. It measures along traits like openness and extroversion and neuroticism and agreeableness. And the way that we're constituted within those traits is a bell curve across all people. And there's a reason for this distribution of different traits. I want to give a couple of examples. They're the most highly predictive thing for which way you will lean politically than anything other than what your parents taught you and how you grew up.
Wow.
And so there's a key trait called trait openness. How open are you to new things? How often do you say yes? Do you like new ideas and new people? And that's very, very correlated with being liberal or having a liberal value set.
And
That's
what's
why
the
we
opposite
have.
of that? But in other words, all of these things are in opposition. And
Yes.
so trait openness, what's the other end of that spectrum?
Low trait openness, it's called. I wish I had something a little bit more riveting,
Come on,
Marshall,
man.
but yeah, I know. We'll work on it.
Okay, go
So
ahead. Yeah.
when we think about why we have these spots of blue that are cities in the middle of red states, part of that is because people who move to cities like different accents and different foods and different people. They're very open to it. It's the same thing you get in Hollywood. Creatives are very high trait openness. And that's wonderful for a lot of ways. It's wonderful for creating. It's wonderful for welcoming other people. Now, conservatives are lower trait openness. This is not a moral difference. One is not better or worse. And in fact, there's reasons to want to be closed in certain ways. And one of them is if we imagine the Native Americans, when the Europeans came offering smallpox blankets, for them to say, hang on a minute, we don't want too much contamination with the outgroup that we can't digest properly. Let's say that they were to say that. That's a positive thing. And so you can understand conservative thinking better and liberal thinking better. Conservatives like borders around things. Build a wall is a brilliant conservative slogan. They like borders around gender. There's two genders. Maybe there's some things that are different, but foundationally there's two different genders or two different sexes, I should say. And that's what we're going to hold to. They like borders and closed borders where their skin begins and where a vaccination begins. It's a different trait structure. Well, if you think about openness, liberalism is like the gas pedal and conservatism is the brake.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
All right. Talk about the other traits quickly, because I think they combine in interesting ways. It's more than just, everyone has more than one trait, obviously.
Yes. So the other primary one that I would want to talk about is trait conscientiousness. And conscientiousness means, do you show up on time? Do you return phone calls? Do you do what you're going to say? Do you stick in till the job gets done? Conservatives are much higher in trait conscientiousness. Now, that's an incredible trait to be high in, because if you're high in that, it codes for success in the real world, merit-based success in the real world, more than any other trait aside from intelligence. It's an amazing trait. And it correlates with a number of things. Longer lifespans, better health, more stable finances, and more steady long-term marriages. So that's a very helpful structure. And so one of the things that happens when we come at each other, well, I'll mention one other one. We have trait empathy, which probably tucks under agreeableness, that liberals are higher in. And liberals, and I'm a liberal by constitution and by my upbringing in a lot of ways, we tend to come at things through trait openness and through trait empathy. And there's a reason we do that, because part of what our job is to say, look, if you build a wall and you make it impenetrable, then new ideas and people won't get in. And we will stagnate and die because we won't be able to assimilate and accommodate new things and ideas. And conservatives say we have to do that with respect to what has come before and slowly enough that we can digest this and maintain our shared value set. That's a rough way of looking at the two. And you can think of high trait openness as inclusion. The trait for inclusion. Is inclusion a value that we should all have for, our institutions in our world and our society? Absolutely. Should that be the top value of a hierarchy? Well, then it gets problematic very fast, whether you're a, math club or a crew of plumbers or a platoon or a ballet troupe. It just doesn't. So it's all about how we order this. And if we understand and respect and honor the fact that conservatives order their value set in a lot of ways to see our willful blindness and blind spots, and we see things that they can't see. And if we can differentiate each other in those ways, it doesn't become a moral war. And the moral war and the screaming, augmented with other elements that I'm sure we'll talk about, are what have kind of shut us down in the cycle of viewing the other as a complete, undifferentiated monolith that only wants to kill us.
And Gregg, before we move on, just for our audience, how malleable are these traits? Like, can openness be? Can somebody move up the scale of openness, or is it just like you are who you are?
It's such a good question, Nick. It's the perfect question. So there's one trick to moving up one full standard deviation of openness, which is if you complete and undertake an entire psilocybin hero's journey. Your brain and mind will move one standard deviation higher in openness. Now, in the absence of psychedelic drugs, these traits are fairly fixed. We hope different things for people. We've seen people grow more open to things when trauma puts them harder into their traits, let's say.
Mhm.
We've seen people who aren't diligent learn to be more conscientious. But these are fixed approaches to the world. And so to ask somebody as liberals, which we often do, and we do more, the more we tilt left into leftism, where we scream to educate people into greater empathy or greater trait openness, this is as useful as imploring Cory Booker to become an introvert. It's
Right.
Yeah. It's funny. This whole issue, I think, brought Gregg and me together in a very particular way, because even though I didn't know anything about the big 5 personality traits, ever since I was a teenager, I kind of understood that politics was downstream of psychology, that
Mhm.
whenever you have a political conversation or argument with someone, it's actually a proxy for other things that are going on in each of those people, other emotional needs they have or fears they have, that they are projecting onto the other side or afraid of from the other side. And that's why political arguments tend to be so frustrating, because they're not really what they're about. And I think one of the things I love about this is it helps you understand how to get beneath it, even though I think there are other ways to get beneath it as well. But, I think it's a great way to move in. So, Gregg, I told our listeners and our viewers that you've actually walked this walk for a long time now. And you believe really strongly that, that in a liberal democracy, we have to believe in persuasion and debate rather than intimidation. And so you've done something extraordinary that I know very few people, maybe nobody, who's done as much as you have, which is you have really tried to bridge the divide yourself and get into relationship with people you don't agree with politically, and find out what makes them tick, who they are, what they believe in, what is good about them. And I'm very curious, and I think our viewers would be curious to hear a little bit about sort of what you've learned, who you've met. I mean, you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but you can. It's like what the experience has been for you personally, and sort of what you've seen.
Well, I want to start with your mention about politics being downstream from psychology, because I think you're one of the most astute observers of that. And then I still laugh to think about how often we quarrel, even with us knowing that. But I think it's worth pausing on that for a moment to understand that sort of crouched habit. I think that we are frozen and locked up psychologically right now all the time, due in part to social media and algorithms, and a lot of that's by design. And I have a lot of friends, and my community has always looked this way. So this is a natural extension of my life. My life has been being much more liberal in communities. Like I went to a Jesuit high school where there was a more prevailing conservative community who took care of and nurtured and argued with and sharpened and strengthened and negotiated with me and empowered me. So I have a good starting base with this. And I have conversations all the way around the wheel. I mean, I've talked to, I would say a great number of predominant influencers, podcasters, people on the right, public intellectuals, theologians, and a good number of our Republican politicians as well. And I'm constantly in conversation. And what's interesting is the more that I am, the more nuance that I can see in who and how everything is to the right, let's say, of center. And you start to differentiate all these differences among them. And then you can then interact with it in a way that's not calling it one thing, which forces it more and more and more into being one integrated thing, which is, of course, what the right does to us too.
I mean, talk about it a little more. You have found real wisdom among many of these people, and you respect them greatly. And I think this is what I'm asking our viewers and our audience to go along with. And as I said earlier, I think it's important to remember that until very recently, Democrats were the party that was for things. We believed in things. We wanted to make the world a better place. I think when Trump came into power, it was so disturbing to so many people that there was so much rage and so much fear that it turned us in many ways into this very angry state that is not the natural state for Democrats. And I think it's really important to think about a future where we go back to what Democrats really stand for, which is to make the world a better place for everybody. And part of that better place is a liberal democracy. And that means being able to talk to the people you disagree with. So I'm coming back to that now. So just, give us even just an anecdote.
I'll give a few examples.
Yeah.
I mean, I was on a conversation with a, congressman. We were working on trying to help figure out the messaging for infrastructure in a bipartisan way under Biden's administration, because we thought that could be a positive. And Marshall, you contributed to this. So, in my working on this, one of the phrases that I have is that reality is where ideology goes to die. The minute you're going to solve a problem in the real world, none of the ideology applies. You might need something from a conservative tool bag. You might need a free market libertarian idea. You might need something that's figuring out how to protect in an innovative way workers' rights entrepreneurially that isn't going to crush the overall system and bring everything down. It's incredibly complicated. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was on with a congressman and we were talking about regulations. This was years ago. And I was forthrightly, giving my opinion, and he laughed at me. We were on a kind of intimate Zoom. And he said, "You liberals think that every time we want to roll back regulations, it's because we want to dump toxins in rivers." And I just laughed. It was like, I said, "You're exactly right." Like that is almost literally the precise level of my awareness. So hold, please. Like, I get it. Talk to me, let me figure it out. And we went through all sorts of things, public, private, partnerships and how that hastens the actual competence that gets brought in. The fact that it takes years to build an off-ramp in New York City. I mean, all that stagnation and the way that codified corruption collects around all these channels.
And it took 5 years. It took 5 years for Ezra Klein to finally write Abundance and for Democrats to go, oh, maybe we have too many regulations.
Yes.
It's really interesting.
Yes.
It's really interesting how these things have become ossified on both sides.
Absolutely. And when they ossify, everybody loses.
Yes.
Like pick any topic, abortion, immigration. I mean, you and I have worked on polling that indicates that 80% of Americans and up agree on pretty much every single major topic.
Yeah.
But if we remain in these crouches, then we can't do anything.
I think it should be said that Gregg and Billy Ray, who the three of us have worked together a lot, have spent innumerable hours helping and talking to and advising Democrats over the last 9 years, much more than I have. I mean, you guys are in personal relationship with so many Democratic lawmakers. And, what I've heard from you, Gregg, over the years is kind of this ongoing story of essentially cowardice, of an unwillingness to confront the things that needed to be confronted, or an unwillingness to talk to the people who needed to be talked to. And I think it's really important to hear that, because as we look at the wreckage of the Democratic Party today, and by the way, yes, we had great news. So, we're going to move forward and we're going to recreate this party. But it's important to look at why things got so bad. And I think you were in the middle of that and you saw things that most people didn't see. And talk a little bit about that. And you don't have to name names because, you don't want to sort of do people in. But I think it was a really frustrating experience for you.
Immensely so. It has been incredibly frustrating for me to not have Democrats speak up and denounce the voices in their party that are wildly illiberal or wildly opposed to rule of law or wildly chaotic, and it's like they can't figure out how to do that. And one of the things that's happening right now that's very interesting when we talk about an undifferentiated monolith on the right right now is having an enormous battle.
Yeah.
And on one side is Ted Cruz and Ben Shapiro, and Charlie Kirk was on this side, and Jordan Peterson, and Tom Cotton and Seth Dillon, from the Babylon Bee, and Douglas Murray. And on the other side is the actual intense, writhing, your body, my choice, actual alt-right. And they're having this battle. Now, a lot of a Democratic or a liberal reaction is to say, well, who cares, because you didn't draw a line when it came to Trump, and that's where we wanted you to draw the line. None of us have drawn a line where the other side is happy with us right now, believe me. And if we don't wake up to that, and if we're going to drive everybody to the same and not understand that there is a big chessboard we all have to live on. We are married in America, conservatives and liberals. We do not want one side to be dominant, tilting to their darker half. And if we can wake up now and learn from this, especially with conservatism coming, it's blooming. We have a coming Christian revival. If we choose to treat everybody who is Christian in this country as if they are a hardened Christian nationalist that we have some extreme example of, we're in trouble. 68% of Americans are Christian. 88% have a Bible in their of us have a Bible in our home, and most of them have 4. If we cannot start to differentiate and understand that right now we need to talk to a bunch of people, we need to open up our mind, we're going to be in a whole different version where we look back at this moment and we think that these are kind of halcyon days.
This is what you're saying leads into something I think about all the time, and you and I have actually talked about this. There's a delusion on the left and on the right that somehow, through some magical process, the other side is just going to disappear. And that's never going to happen. And by the way, I think what we're seeing right now in the Trump administration is the living out of that delusion. They think that if they could just get all this shit done and do all this, that the other half of the country would just go, oh, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry, and just give up, as opposed to what's happening. But that delusion also exists on the left, that somehow it will just magically change. And I think there needs to be, speaking of Christians, a come to Jesus moment for America where we realize that we're stuck together. And when we use World War II analogies, which I do all the time, and Gregg laughs at me all the time, but when we use World War II analogies for domestic problems, you run into a huge problem, because we can't have a war in America. But trust me, people talk about civil wars. Civil wars would last 24 hours because the government has all the armaments, all the guys having their AR-15s, across the country mean nothing against rocket launchers and everything else. There is no possibility of a civil war in America that would lead to anything but the end of America. We have got to figure out a way to live together, which is one of the reasons you and I talk so much about this. And also, I want to be more specific about this, and I think you and I may not fully agree on this to the extent. I think what I call the industry of rage, which is, has been going on now for 30 years at least, which is that people who make billions of dollars by getting people to hate each other, is in many ways the reason we're in the mess we're in right now, except that it's also a matter of foreign operations against us. And this is something you've pursued quite a lot. And I think you know more than I do about this. And I think it's important for people to understand that, when you go on these platforms, you're not necessarily interacting with even human beings. And if you are interacting with human beings, they often are not Americans. They're often from Russia or China or North Korea or Iran, and, we fall into this trap. They want us to be angry. They want us to be filled with hate, and we fall into it. So, first of all, talk about what you've learned, because you've been really deeply into this for some time, studying this and figuring out what to do about it.
Well, I think there's 3 primary problems. One of them is, as you say, hostile foreign regimes, running psychological operations, psyops. And I don't even think the American mind, who's going to our computer and we're going to, tweet the thing that saves moderation in America into the void, can comprehend a troll farm with thousands of employees and tens of thousands of phones pushing stuff out constantly on social media and through coordinated bot activity into comment sections on hunting sites and into comment sections on gender sites. And the thing that we forget with this is that they want to empower both sides. The KGB during the Cold War used to finance the Black Panthers, and then they would forge letters from the KKK threatening black leaders at the same time. The aim is not pro-vax, not pro-vax. The aim isn't trans, not trans, or do we hate Jews or do we not hate Jews? Right. The aim is to have us filled with rage and tearing ourselves apart into decompensation and having no ability to talk to one another. It's to exacerbate the Tower of Babel effect that we have let in through free speech and our own shitty choices when it comes to our technology use. Right. And, the technology use, just to make clear for a moment what this is like. I mean, we have made crack abundantly clear, abundantly free to everybody. It's like, imagine when you're 12 years old, Marshall, and you're going to school. If your mom, crouched down and gave you your lunch bag with your peanut butter and jelly sandwich and an apple and said, oh, also, here's this thing, it's going to go in your pocket. It contains unlimited access to pornography, more sexual imagery than all of your predecessors back to the beginning of mankind. Also self-harming memes that are fueled by the Islamic Republic. Also terrible misogyny from bad faith players who are trying to teach you to be an online pimp. And also the Ayatollah Khomeini can contact you wherever you want. And that's going to be in your pocket. It's going to be in your desk when you're at school. It's in your locker. It's in the bathroom. It's there all day with you. And we can't do anything about it because despite the fact that we're adults, we have, free speech just means that we're helpless to establish any kind of value hierarchy. And that's what we've done. And if you think that you are powerful, if I think I am powerful enough to be online all day in seething toxic currents, which I do sometimes, and maintain your sanity and think that the thoughts that you're thinking are your own against coordinated foreign activity, psychopathic algorithms, and deep machine learning that is literally reading your eyes on a screen and tracking all sorts of different measurements for what snags your interest. We think that it's water off a duck's back for us. It's not. We're like a sponge.
What we're really talking about here, I think, is a destruction of our values. In other words, by the way, by talking about it like when we were 12, okay, you realize how unbelievable that was because when we were 12, there were still values that would say, oh, you shouldn't do that, okay? Because it is being done right now. The parents are giving the 12-year-old that phone. So why is it weird to us? Because we knew you couldn't do that then, okay? A lot of what we talk about on this show is the idea that we need a movement of values, a movement of reform toward core American values that were embraced, for 235 of the last 250 years and have been so hollowed out, one by what's happening with social media and the industry of rage and the foreign, actors, and also by the rule of neoliberalism over our economy, which basically said that profit is the most important thing and the public good means nothing. And that therefore guys like Zuckerberg can do this and all these other people can do this and they pay no price and no one can stop them. It's made everyone feel incredibly powerless and therefore incredibly angry. And so it's fed into this cycle of what you're talking about. And this is where we have to stop it, I think, is by standing up and saying we do have values and we're going to live by our values and we're going to demand that our leaders live by our values.
Part of this is to try and get us out of a younger, not in real time posture towards each other, where we're just sort of screaming and blaming constantly. Yeah. I liken the left and the right in this country. We're having an insane marital dispute and things are about, a divorce is risk that's going to completely decimate the children and our financial affairs and our safety and ability to protect ourselves and the rest of the world. Yeah. How you get there is not by saying, well, here's my laundry list of all the past things that you have to take responsibility for, all the ways that you started it. It doesn't work that way. You can go back forever. George Will wrote a wonderful op-ed years ago that there is no starting point. If you blow up the filibuster, does it go back to McConnell? But then Reid did it first. And,
Right.
you're talking about Donald Trump unleashing all this with Democrats, but he's a reaction to some things that we're sending in the popular culture. We can go back forever and never get anywhere. And unfortunately, we're at a point in our national history where we are running out of time. China right now is building 33 large-scale nuclear reactors, which are going to power AI. As we know, we need enormous amounts of energy, and that's going to power drone warfare and the future of warfare. We don't have one in development right now.
Yep.
If we cannot look at the actual chessboard right now with the pieces and understand that if the limit to your imagination of evil is Cory Booker or Donald Trump, then you have an incredibly limited imagination for what evil can be on these respective sides. Things can get a lot worse. And if we are unwilling in our outrage to look at the actual chessboard and navigate towards American health and interests, no matter who will work with us to pull back together again, we know where this is headed because we've all read history books, at least those of us who aren't cut off from them because they're too colonialist.
Right.
So-
Well, yes.
So that all sounds really terrible, Greg. Thank you. So what do we do? I guess is my question. Like, what what is this? So if the Democrats are the opposition party at the moment, and the party that's going to have to steer us back toward sanity, like, what do they do and what do we do?
All right. So here's my analysis.
Yeah.
Right now, there are three factions of politics that have enormous reach into the culture. I move through about 16 different pie slices of the culture, let's say, with some regularity, or have an eye on it, or talk to people from them. You have the sort of far left, and for that I mean AOC, who is certainly different from Bernie, who is different than Mamdani. There's varying degrees of this. They have enormous reach. They have platform. They talk to young people. The other one is MAGA, and MAGA now stretches through a lot of centrists and even disillusioned liberals. That's probably the biggest one. They too, like the further left faction of the Democratic Party, are talking to 8 to 12 slices of this pie. And then you have the far right, the real far right, no fooling around, hardcore misogyny, Jew hate, chaos, even want to do in Trump to get an agenda further beyond Trump and MAGA. And they also have reach into maybe eight of these pie slices. And all of them can make their own weather. They can have a theatrical declaration. They can have a moment. They can have a rally. Everybody knows what they're selling, and they make their own virility and virality, let's say. The piece that is missing are the mainstream moderate sane Democrats, and among those are many of my favorites and your favorites who are amazing, but they're only speaking in 2 to 3 slices of the pie, and they don't even kind of comprehend yet the sort of toughness in debate and stature that it takes to talk more broadly. They also don't understand and haven't learned yet that the process by which you learn to talk to everybody, no matter how hard and tough that is, a lot of people have been doing this all the way through. Douglas Murray doesn't struggle with holding his own, right? Or Ben Shapiro or AOC in any quarters anywhere. And so if they can't go out and do that, the process by which you go to talk to all these other places is the process by which you also are undeceived about all the things that you don't know about all these people and all the ways that they think so that you can talk to them. It's a learning process. And I think that the group that has the most violated trust right now is at an all-time high in this nation, as we know. It is the moderate Democrats. They're the only true institutionalists right now. And the institutions haven't worked. Our kids are not healthier. You and I talk about this all the time. In the past, 50 years since Reagan, $50 trillion with a T, up to 60 now, has moved from the bottom 90% of America to the top 1%.
Yeah.
And the odds of passing a law, the correlation between public desire for a law and a law passing is 0% now for years and years.
Yeah.
This is broken.
Right.
So as institutionalists, distrust, they're the ones who have to reconcile with the American people. It's not all their fault. Maybe they don't deserve to, But for this position to hold, they have to. And before reconciliation is truth. You have to have truth before reconciliation. If these voices do not start to talk about the ways in which the American public, in part, whether it is their particular fault or not, have felt gaslit and overlooked and abandoned by these institutions, if they can't look at that and speak to it honestly and come clean about the reality of what that is and tack to a higher course from there, they're never going to enter the bigger real conversation that will start to move all the way around the wheel of the culture. And that's very hard to do. And it starts, one of the biggest points is you have to draw a line. And there are radical policies that are way outside the American extreme ascendant in the party. I went back and read the 2023 Democratic Socialists of America platform in its entirety before they snipped it up and made it cleaner about a year ago. And what it asks for is zero borders, zero foreign American bases, seizing the means of production, no police, any police measures and databases reduced to zero, no incarceration, making drugs and prostitution legal. It is insane. Now, if AOC and Bernie don't follow all those things, okay, but let's start to talk about that with nuance. If Mamdani literally cannot disavow saying globalize the intifada and nobody on our side will say, we need to clarify that or denounce it, we haven't even begun a conversation that is now raging in earnest on the right, albeit around a borderline that we don't like as liberals. But they're having that conversation, and we haven't even mentioned the elephants in the room. And I don't see any way for the Democratic Party to save itself without them delineating what is too radical, trusting other people more broadly, that's aligned with the American people, and trusting allies across the aisle who actually are allies, but we've lost sight of, and tacking to a higher shared American value set. Wes Moore and Spencer Cox did this beautifully. I don't know if you've seen that spot. We should show that spot or link to it. They had a great example of this where they both went on, they introduced each other, they talked about their differences, they're warm. It's clear they actually like each other. And obviously they're not running against each other, but this is a wonderful start and a seed, because if they were running, let's say for president, how I would feel, how anyone would feel is, either way, we are now going to have a way more high resolution view of their positions on the actual issues and policies, because they're being civil and they're not wasting time screaming and with nicknames and canceling and being outraged and crying victim to a bunch of things. We can actually get real conversations to know what they each think. And should either of them win and be in charge of these two men, I will be okay and safe. And both of those men, in how much they like each other, also make clear that I, whether I'm Jewish or black or green or Arab or a Christian or white or anything that I am, will have a place in this conversation.
The way I look at what you're saying is that the so-called centrists of the Democratic Party have to have a full-throated denunciation of neoliberalism. In other words, they have to take on, as you put it, the 60 trillion transfer of wealth that's taken place over the last 45 years. And the only people in the Democratic Party taking that on right now are Bernie and AOC and Mamdani. And if your answer is socialism, then you're missing the point, which is there was a time in America when capitalism worked for working people a hell of a lot better than it does now. But the point is, you can't just say, I'm a centrist and I want centrist solutions. Sometimes being a moderate means being angry. And there's a reason to be angry about what's taken place over the last 45 years in America and how we've been corrupted on the economic side. Okay. Then you say, okay, but also I'm willing to embody what used to be called conservative values that turn out to just be core American values. Personal responsibility, belief in the family, belief in community, belief in, again, working together, debate, compromise, persuasion, all the things that are core American values, justice, the rule of law, all people are created equal, all of these things which it's like I've been saying this for 8 years, that in some ways now the Democrats are the conservatives, and we can't really embrace it because they're so afraid of that word. But we're trying to conserve these American values. And by the way, it's a core American value, as far as I'm concerned, to believe that workers should be able to create better lives for themselves. So even this anger that I think Democrats need to pursue against the neoliberal rule that's taken place for so long is really a core American value, that we're supposed to have justice in America. We're supposed to have fairness for everybody, and everybody should have a shot to succeed.
And that comes through, I think, Marshall. That's very, very well said. It comes through a fearless moral inventory.
Yeah.
And part of that is,
Yeah.
people, I'm in a lot of quarters where people are completely outraged and outdone by Trump all the time, for some reasons that are good, that are valid, and for some reasons that are invented, and for some reasons that are distorted by the filters and the ways that they reach them. An example that I mean of a fearless moral inventory is, and because you and I went through this together, Joe Biden was, by every account, President Biden, way too old and ill-equipped to continue to run again for another 4 years. It was undeniable to what everybody saw on every TV set with their own eyes. I have friends who were in Congress who were in limo rides with him 9 months into his first term that said he was incoherent at times. I have friends who were very, very liberal friends who were in foreign policy planning meetings at the 2-year mark who said they forgot he was in the room. The Democrats, every time that we're angry about Trump and the Republicans' unwillingness to just see our point of how truly awful he is in many ways, need to remember that this was verboten across mainstream media. It was verboten across MSNBC and CNN. And look, we know what happens with this. I used the spouse metaphor earlier. Now I'll use a parent metaphor. If you scream at a kid, or frankly your spouse, and tell them you're useless, you're lazy, everything that you do is the wrong thing, you're horrible, you're the worst version of everything you are, what do you think happens to that person that you're in relationship with? This is what we do to each other. For decades, the right has been screaming at us that we're insane, unhinged Marxist communists. And as we've huddled into a tighter defensive posture and embraced more bullies and bad faith malicious players, because you need everyone you get against these guys, and as we're screaming that, John McCain is racist and Mitt Romney is a misogynist because he had binders of women, it's pushing them into this structure. Our attention and where we put it makes the world. We make the reality based on how we are willing to look at a chessboard. If we want to see all opposing pieces that are a monolith, okay, then we're going to go to war and we're not going to help America.
Yeah.
If we can differentiate and learn to negotiate again, which is foundationally American, all these forces, all the stuff that has cropped up, it's so un-American. Yeah. We have free debate. We have freedom of religion. We have freedom of speech. I mean, we have vigorous disagreements here, and we have all sorts of flaws, but they've never been as powerful as this amazing, unlikely run of freedom that we've had, and, unmolested liberty in as many terms as we could muster it.
Well, that's a great place to stop. Listen, man, thank you so much. I think people hearing your point of view is so important at this moment, to understand that if we're going to be the grown-ups and we're going to stand up, then we have to look at ourselves as much as we look at the other side, and we have to look forward to create a grown-up world. And you're just a huge part of that for me. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you guys both having me on and letting me talk to, a different slice of America and the body politic, and also 11 films. A lot of us have this feeling on both sides. I hear it, right? It could happen here. It's happening here. Now it's happening here already.
Yeah.
And if that is, what it means is that we need to lift our gaze from past grievances and awaken out of this sort of, idol that we've had since World War II, and recognize, okay, we're in history now, and that's okay. We can be strong enough to look at the truth and negotiate it now and look at it. But we don't get to coast anymore.
That's it. That's it, man. Thank you, Gregg.
Really interesting.
Thank you
Greg.
both.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate you both. Thank you.
Take care. I find Gregg amazing.
Yeah, that was a really interesting conversation. I got to admit, like he talked about sort of how tribal we've become and how, we shrink back into our defensive positions and just want to hate the other side. And
yes.
I got to say, like, as he was talking about like having to be the grown-ups and reach across and talk to different people in different ways, I felt that bubbling up in myself. I'm like,
yes,
fuck that, But
I know,
but I know. There are some really important core truths about, like, from the psychological angle that he was talking about, and from sort of pulling our country back together, that that I think everybody needs to think about.
They need to think about, look, I talk about the hero's journey all the time. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things in the hero's journey also is that the hero must look within. The hero must question him or herself, okay? And if we are to prevail in this contest, then Democrats must look at themselves. And it's not just because we're criticized by the right, because we know that that's weaponized by social media and all of that. It's because that's the only way people are going to trust us. And when Gregg talks about this, he often talks about honesty all the way down, okay? Like, why don't our elected officials answer questions when they're asked in interviews? Why do they talk around them?
Right.
Why don't they stand up and be strong? The Democrats have to be the grown-ups. They have to be the people who in World War II stood up and said, this is what we're going to have to do in order to win this war. This is not a violent war. Thank God, we hope.
Yeah.
Okay. But it's still a war. It's a war for the hearts and minds of 70% of Americans. And we're in this fight. And God bless us. We had, I think the first victory last week.
Yeah. Oh, thank God.
It makes me think of that great Churchill's line where he says, now this is not the end, and it's not even the beginning of the end, but it may be the end of the beginning. We're in this fight. We have to stay in this fight, and we have to stay honest and real and strong. We have to rise up.
All right. Well, on that note, I believe that a lot of people who watch this episode may have some pretty strong opinions about what we talked about. So you can give us a call at 503-212-4600. You can leave up to a 5-minute message, and you can remain anonymous. You can also email us at shout@thedangerousones.com. After you watch this episode, go over to www.thedangerousones.com. That'll kick you over to our Substack, where you can become a subscriber or paid subscriber. And we will have a deeper dive into some of the things that we talked about today in today's post. You can subscribe to the audio version of The Rising by clicking the link in the description. We can't thank you enough for joining us today. This was a really interesting conversation, Marshall. And just remember, if we think big, if we meet fear with courage, and if we build community, we can all rise together.